Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't belong, even in a place you'd worked your whole life to reach? Imagine sitting in a first-class seat you earned with every ounce of effort, every long night, every quiet victory, and still being asked to prove you deserve it. What would you do? Stay silent and let the humiliation pass, or stand your ground and risk everything to remind the world who you are? This is the story of Dr. Naomi Carter, a black CEO whose calm strength turned one moment of injustice at 30,000 feet into a movement that reshaped an entire industry. It's not just about a seat on a plane, it's about every person who's ever been questioned, overlooked, or told they don't belong. If you were her, what would you choose to endure or to enlighten as you listen? I invite you to imagine yourself in her place. Feel the silence, the stares, the weight of dignity held steady against prejudice. And then, the power of one voice that refused to break. If this story moves you, please like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The airport was still half asleep when Dr. Naomi Carter arrived at Dallas-Fort Worth. A soft pink light spilled through the tall glass windows, brushing across her face as she walked through the VIP check-in lane, heels quiet on the marble floor. Her black leather carry-on rolled beside her smooth, precise, like everything she did. Inside it was a folder stamped Viridian Biotech, the company she had built from her kitchen table after Hurricane Katrina. Naomi took a slow sip of coffee. It was bitter, but familiar. She always said she liked her mornings quiet, the kind of silence that lets her breathe before the noise of the world began again. She smiled at the young agent behind the counter. "Good morning," she said softly. The agent smiled back, genuine, polite, tired. "Morning, ma'am." Flight number, Naomi handed over her phone. Her boarding pass glowed bright and clear. AstraJet 617 seat 1A first class. The scanner beeped. Green. Approved. She thanked the agent and moved toward security, still scrolling through the final updates from her team in Boston. They were presenting a new emergency response kit to the federal board, a project that could save thousands of lives during natural disasters. To most travelers, she was just another woman in a navy suit with soft curls pinned neatly at the back of her head. No one knew she was the CEO of one of the country's fastest-growing biomedical firms, and Naomi liked it that way. At the TSA line, she moved quietly, laptop out, shoes off, calm as the ocean at dawn. An elderly man ahead of her dropped his ID. She bent, picked it up, and handed it back with a gentle smile. He said, "Thank you, sweetheart," his accent southern and warm. "No problem, sir," she replied. It was also ordinary the way mornings should be, but as she reached gate A21, something shifted. A new gate agent had taken over a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyeliner and sharper tone. Her name tag read K. Mitchell. Naomi placed her phone on the scanner again. Beep. Green. Yet the woman frowned. "Are you sure this ticket is yours?" Naomi blinked. Surprised? "Yes. It was booked under my name, Dr. Naomi Carter." The woman's eyes flicked over her dark skin. Simple pearl earrings. No makeup except a trace of lip balm. "You're flying first class." Naomi hesitated, not out of guilt, but out of disbelief that the question still existed. "Yes," she said quietly. "Is there a problem?" Mitchell gave a tight smile. "Probably, just a system mix-up. Ma'am, happens all the time." She tapped a few keys, frown deepening. Naomi stood still, watching the line build behind her. A man coughed impatiently. Mitchell finally waved her through, her tone lighter but her eyes still suspicious. "All right, you're good to go. Enjoy your flight." Naomi's thank you came out soft but firm, the kind that carried the weight of being polite, even when you shouldn't have to be. She walked down the jet bridge, the air growing cooler. She could hear the faint rumble of engines, the steady hum of people finding their seats. For a moment, she felt calm again. Inside the cabin, the lights glowed warm gold. A flight attendant with a slick blonde bun greeted her at the door. "Good morning. Welcome aboard," she said automatically, without looking up. Naomi smiled anyway. "Good morning." The woman's eyes finally met hers, and something small, almost invisible, flickered there. A pause, a scan, a question left unsaid. Naomi found her seat 1A, window side. She set down her bag, smoothed the fabric of her blazer, and reached for the safety card tucked in the seat pocket. A habit. She liked to read things people ignored. Through the window, the sun climbed higher over the runway, turning the silver wings outside into gold. She took a breath. This trip meant something big, a partnership that would provide medical relief to disaster zones across the country. Her phone buzzed a message from her assistant. "Board meeting confirmed. Boston HQ ready for your arrival. Proud of you, Dr. C." Naomi smiled again, a rare, full smile. Then she locked her phone and leaned back. The world was quiet again, just the steady drone of boarding announcements, the scrape of luggage overhead. A steward passed by, offering water bottles. Naomi reached for one, but before she could thank him, another voice cut through calm, clipped, official. "Excuse me, ma'am," the blonde attendant said. Her name badge read Elaine Porter. Her tone wasn't rude, not yet, just laced with disbelief. "This section is reserved for first-class passengers. Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Naomi froze, water still in hand. She turned her head slowly, her voice low and steady. "Yes," she said. "Seat 1A." Elaine frowned. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" Naomi unlocked her phone and showed it. The screen glowed clearly. Elaine studied it longer than necessary, then forced a smile. "Ah, must be a mix-up in our system. Just wanted to be sure." Naomi gave a polite nod. "No problem." But inside, something quiet shifted a small knot forming in her chest. The moment passed, but it stayed. The glance, the tone, the subtle question behind every word, "Do you belong here outside?" The engines hummed louder. "Inside." Naomi pressed her hand against the armrest and whispered to herself, "Stay calm. Just fly." The cabin lights dimmed. Passengers settled in. But the air felt heavier now, like the start of a storm no one else could see. And somewhere deep down, Naomi Carter knew this was not going to be an ordinary flight. Elaine Porter's voice carried just enough edge to turn a polite question into an accusation. "Are you absolutely sure, ma'am?" she asked again, her brow tightening as if Naomi's presence in that seat had personally inconvenienced her. Naomi lifted her eyes from the safety card she'd been pretending to read. Her tone was calm. "Yes. Seat 1A." A quiet wave of attention moved through the cabin. The man across the aisle, a tall passenger in a crisp gray suit, peeked over his newspaper. His name, she would later learn, was Mark Hollow. His expression carried that familiar blend of amusement and judgment, the kind reserved for people who supposedly didn't belong. Elaine smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "Of course. It's just that sometimes people wander up here by mistake. I'll double-check." She turned away, heels striking the carpet with sharp precision. Naomi exhaled slowly. The engines outside still hummed and idle, the light through the window softening to gold. She told herself not to overthink it. Maybe it truly was a mix-up. Maybe. But she'd lived long enough to recognize the shape of disbelief. It always came dressed as courtesy. Across the aisle, Mark Hollow lowered his paper. First time in this section, he asked with a grin that wasn't friendly. Naomi didn't look up. "No," he chuckled. "I was just asking. These seats spoil you. Once you start, Coach never feels the same." "I'll keep that in mind," she said evenly. He studied her for another second, eyes lingering on the simple gold chain around her neck, the lack of designer logos, the plain travel blazer. He nodded to himself, as if confirming a theory. Right. Before Naomi could respond, Elaine returned, holding a small tablet. "I checked with the system, but your name doesn't seem to be showing in the premium manifest. Could I see your ID again?" The hum in the cabin dimmed. A few passengers exchanged looks. Naomi's heart gave one heavy beat. She handed over her driver's license and boarding pass. Elaine compared them like a detective examining counterfeit bills. "This may take a minute," Elaine said, glancing toward the galley. "Please remain here while I contact the captain." Naomi sat perfectly still. Her mind wanted to run through explanations, technical glitch, data entry error, but her body knew better. This was not about technology. It was about disbelief dressed in uniform blue. Behind her, someone sighed loudly. "Can we just take off already?" Naomi kept her eyes on the window. The runway glimmered in the sun. She traced the horizon line with her gaze, forcing her breathing to steady. Elaine disappeared through the curtain to the front. The moments stretched long, measured only by the clicking overhead bins and murmured conversations. The blonde attendant reappeared with Captain Martin Doyle trailing behind her. His cap sat low on his forehead, and his posture spoke of mild irritation. "Good morning," he said briskly. "Dr. Carter, is it?" Naomi nodded. "There seems to be a small issue with the seat assignment. Do you mind stepping out for a moment while we sort this out?" Her voice stayed soft, but carried through the cabin. "Captain, I would rather stay seated until the system is checked. I'm not sure why this is necessary." Mark Hollow muttered under his breath. Maybe she sneaked in. Gloria Simmons, the elderly woman in seat 2B, leaned forward. "That's enough," she said, her tone firm. "She's done nothing wrong." The captain cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Ma'am, please, this is standard procedure." Naomi looked up at him. "Is it?" The captain hesitated. "Well, occasionally there are errors. I scanned my ticket," Naomi said, her voice steady. It turned green. "The system confirmed my boarding. I've complied with every request. Why am I being asked to leave my seat?" Silence followed, the kind of silence that tightens around the ribs. Elaine shifted from one foot to the other. "We just need to verify, then verify," Naomi said, "but I'll stay right here." Her composure unsettled them more than anger could have. Jonas Lee, the young man 2 rows back, raised his phone slightly, pretending to check a message. The screen began recording. The captain sighed. "Fine. Remain seated. We'll sort it out." He turned to Elaine, whispering something Naomi couldn't hear, then walked back toward the cockpit. Naomi's hands rested on her knees. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. Gloria leaned over. "Honey, don't let them make you small." Naomi smiled faintly. "I won't." Elaine returned moments later, offering a glass of water. "Here, maybe this will help." It sounded like peace, but her tone betrayed irritation. Naomi accepted it anyway. "Thank you." As the water touched her lips, a memory surfaced: her mother standing in a crowded clinic during Katrina, holding a child with fever while a guard asked, "Who's in charge here?" Her mother had smiled, saying, "Doesn't matter, the work still gets done." Naomi blinked, the vision fading. The announcement crackled through the cabin, boarding complete. Cabin crew, prepare doors for departure. Elaine gave Naomi one last uncertain glance before striding down the aisle. Mark Hollow whispered to the woman beside him, "She's lucky they're letting her stay." Naomi caught the words. Let them pass through her like wind. She would not feed them. The plane pushed back from the gate. The world outside began to move. As they taxied, Naomi pulled a small notebook from her purse and began to write. Words steadied her when nothing else did. Stay calm. Observe everything. Never let them rewrite the story while you're still living it. When the engines roared for takeoff, the notebook slipped from her lap. Mark bent to pick it up. "Here," he said. He handed it back, curiosity flickering in his eyes as he noticed the company logo embossed on the cover, Viridian Biotech. He smirked. "So, you work in medicine. I build things that save lives," she said simply. He laughed lightly. "That's quite a job description." Naomi looked out the window, the clouds rising to meet them. "Yes," she said, "it is." The aircraft leveled off, the seatbelt sign chiming softly. Elaine appeared again with her professional smile restored. "Would you like champagne?" Ma'am Naomi met her eyes. "Just water." "Thank you." The attendant hesitated, then nodded and walked away. Naomi turned back to the window. Somewhere below, the vast sprawl of Dallas disappeared beneath clouds. Above them, the sky widened, endless, indifferent, beautiful. She thought of Boston, waiting ahead: the board meeting, the presentation, the promise that her company's new technology could revolutionize disaster response. She'd worked for years to reach this moment, yet here she was, on the edge of another small humiliation dressed as procedure. The seat vibrated softly as the plane entered cruising altitude. Passengers unfolded tablets, headphones, sleep masks. The rhythm of flight resumed. Naomi closed her eyes, trying to let it go, but the echo of Elaine's question wouldn't fade. "Are you sure this ticket is yours?" It wasn't the first time. It never was. A slow ache pressed behind her ribs, not anger, but fatigue, the kind that grows from explaining your right to exist in every room you walk into. She whispered under her breath, barely audible beneath the hum of engines. "You belong here. Remember that." The words steadied her again. Gloria glanced over from the next row, offering a small nod of silent solidarity. Naomi returned it. For a few minutes, peace returned to the cabin. The flight attendants moved down the aisle with trays of drinks, the clink of glass against metal filling the air. But at the front, Elaine whispered something to another crew member, her eyes flicking back toward Naomi's seat. The second attendant frowned, then vanished behind the curtain to the galley. Naomi caught the motion from the corner of her eye. She sighed softly. The storm wasn't over yet. She straightened her shoulders, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. The voice in her head, her mother's voice, rose again. "Stay calm. Let truth do the talking." Outside the window, the sun shimmered across a blanket of clouds, endless and bright. Naomi Carter sat in seat 1A, perfectly still, not knowing that the next few hours would turn her quiet flight into a moment that the entire country would soon be talking about. The plane steadied at 30,000 feet. A soft hum filling the cabin. Passengers settled into their routines, headphones, books, quiet chatter. Only Naomi felt the air still trembling. She could sense that behind the curtain. A conversation about her continued. A glance from one attendant to another. The whisper of shoes against carpet. She'd seen that rhythm before. It always meant someone was trying to decide how far to go. She sipped her water, pretending to focus on her notes. Every page of the folder held numbers and projections that would decide the future of her company. Yet she couldn't read them. The words blurred, heavy with a different weight disbelief disguised as procedure. Elaine reappeared, tablet in hand. Her tone was coolly professional. "Dr. Carter, could I see your ticket once more?" Naomi looked up, steady. "You've already seen it twice. I just need to confirm something. Our manifest is still not showing your name." Naomi reached for her phone. "Here, you can scan it again." Elaine hesitated. "It's just that sometimes people print fake codes. I'm sure you understand. Security's tight these days." Across the aisle. Mark Hollow smirked. "Better safe than sorry." Gloria Simmons' voice cut through the hum, or better respectful than rude. Her words were quiet but firm, the kind of tone that came from decades of classrooms and lessons about fairness. Elaine's smile tightened. "We're simply following protocol." "Ma'am, then follow it," Gloria replied, without assuming guilt first. The tension in the air thickened. Jonas Lee, the young journalist, tilted his phone slightly, his camera already recording. His fingers trembled, not from fear but from anticipation. Something told him this was going to matter later. Naomi inhaled deeply. "Ms. Porter, perhaps it would be easier if you called your supervisor again." Elaine hesitated, then turned sharply and walked away. Naomi turned toward the window, staring at the clouds stretched like rivers of light. For a moment, she felt suspended between two worlds, one where her achievements defined her, and another where her skin erased them. Her mother's voice echoed in memory. "Dignity isn't what they give you, baby. It's what you hold when they try to take it." She closed her eyes, repeating that thought like a prayer. A minute later, Captain Martin Doyle stepped out from the cockpit again, his brow furrowed. "Dr. Carter," he began, his tone courteous but uneasy. "We're still not locating your record in the premium log. It's possible there's been a back-end error. Could I see your confirmation email?" Naomi handed him her phone without hesitation. "Here. You'll find it right above the receipt. Purchased directly through Astrojet's corporate account." The captain scrolled. The company name appeared clear as day. Viridian Biotech, Inc. He paused, glanced at her name again, then at Elaine. "This should be fine." Elaine frowned. "But, Captain, our systems fail," he said. "Let's not make a scene." But the scene had already started. The passengers were whispering, their faces reflecting curiosity, some sympathy, some discomfort. Naomi felt the heat rise beneath her skin, but she forced herself to breathe. "May I speak freely, Captain?" He looked startled. "Of course." She met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "When you ask me to prove I belong in this seat after I've shown every valid document, you're not questioning your system. You're questioning me. You're assuming the error is a person, not a program." The captain's mouth opened, then closed again. He didn't answer. Elaine crossed her arms. "That's not fair, ma'am. We're just ensuring security for all our passengers." Naomi's voice stayed calm, but her words carried weight. Security built on suspicion is not security. It's fear. The cabin went silent. Only the distant rumble of engines filled the pause. Gloria reached out, touching Naomi's arm gently. "You don't have to say more, sweetheart." Naomi gave a small nod. "I'm fine." Captain Doyle cleared his throat. "Dr. Carter, please understand I understand perfectly." She interrupted softly. "I've lived this conversation before." Her eyes didn't waver. For a heartbeat, even Elaine looked unsure. Then the captain nodded once, as if conceding. "We'll correct it. I apologize for the inconvenience." Naomi didn't answer. She turned back to the window. The apology was too light to hold the weight of what had just happened. As the captain walked away, Elaine leaned in and whispered, "You could have made this easier." Naomi looked up. By pretending nothing happened, Elaine's mouth tightened. By cooperating, Naomi smiled faintly. "I did. You just didn't like the way I did it." Elaine blinked, unsure how to reply. Then she turned abruptly, muttering something about checking service carts. Jonas lowered his phone, his heart racing. He typed a quick note, Seat 1A, quiet strength, systemic bias. He didn't yet know that his video would soon travel far beyond this plane. Naomi folded her hands together, pressing her palms until they stopped shaking. Her mind replayed each word, each glance, the way humiliation could be dressed so neatly in professionalism. Mark Hollow leaned back, pretending indifference, but his eyes kept flicking toward her uneasy now, no longer sure who she was. The seatbelt sign chimed softly. The flight smoothed out. A meal service began. The aroma of coffee drifted down the aisle, gentle and warm. Naomi wasn't hungry. She opened her notebook again. Dignity test passed. System test failed. She smiled to herself at the bitter humor of it. Then she added one more line. Watch what happens next. Half an hour passed before Elaine returned, voice lower now. "Dr. Carter, the captain confirmed your booking. It seems the manifest was delayed sinking. Everything's resolved." Naomi nodded. "Thank you." Elaine hesitated. "Would you like anything else, wine, tea? Just still water?" Elaine poured a glass, her hands a little less steady than before. She set it down carefully and left without another word. Naomi stared at the reflection in the glass, the calm face that had learned to survive every silent judgment. She whispered, almost to herself, "Stay steady," from behind. Gloria leaned forward again. "You handled that with grace. Dear, not everyone could." Naomi smiled faintly. "Grace shouldn't have to be armor." Gloria's eyes softened. "But sometimes it's all we have." Naomi nodded. "Yes, until we build something stronger." Outside, the sky turned from white to pale blue, endless and untouched. The light caught the curve of the wing, bright as a blade. Jonas scrolled through the short clip he'd recorded earlier the exchange. Naomi's calm defiance, the hush that followed. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the upload button. Then he whispered, "Not yet." He wanted to understand her story first. Naomi returned her gaze to the clouds. Somewhere far below, the world went on, people rushing, planes landing, decisions made. But here, in the quiet height of the sky, she felt a strange peace, fragile but real. The hurt lingered, yes, but underneath it, something else was forming a resolve, solid as steel. For years, She had built systems that saved lives. Now, she thought, maybe it was time to build one that saved dignity. Her eyes drifted shut. The engines hummed steady, almost like a heartbeat. The flight continued, outwardly calm. But Naomi Carter knew the real turbulence had only just begun. For nearly an hour, the plane floated through the sky in uneasy peace. The passengers had returned to their books and screens. Yet, beneath the calm hum of the engines, there was a pulse of tension that wouldn't fade. Naomi Carter sat upright, her mind still replaying each word, each sideways glance, every hint of doubt she'd endured. She didn't want to relive it, but the memory stayed like a bruise beneath the skin tender, even when untouched. She closed her notebook and tried to focus on the clouds outside. They drifted by in slow silver layers, endless and indifferent. That was the strange thing about flying, no matter how high you went. The weight of what happened on the ground always followed. The flight attendants rolled out the drink cart, their smiles carefully painted back on. When Elaine reached Naomi's row, her movements were measured, almost exaggerated. She poured water again, though Naomi hadn't asked. The glass trembled slightly in her hand. "Thank you," Naomi said quietly. Elaine nodded, but her tone carried a trace of resentment. "Of course. Let me know if you need anything else." Across the aisle. Mark Hollow smirked. "Guess you're all sorted now." "Huh." Naomi turned toward him, her face unreadable. "It appears so." He leaned back, satisfied with the last word. The woman beside him whispered something he ignored. Jonas Lee, sitting 2 rows back, watched it all. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. He adjusted his phone again, pretending to scroll through news while recording in silence. His lens caught the subtle exchanges, the stiff shoulders, the quiet defiance, the discomfort rippling through the cabin. Halfway through the flight, the peace finally broke. Elaine returned from the galley, whispering to her co-worker, a young attendant named Brooke. The two glanced toward Naomi's seat, exchanged uneasy looks, then disappeared behind the curtain again. Moments later, Elaine emerged with a tighter expression and walked directly toward 1A. "Dr. Carter," she began, "I need to ask you one more thing." Naomi put down her water. "Yes, our manifest is updated, but there's still a discrepancy between your ID number and the one in the database. It's probably nothing, but for safety reasons, we need to confirm through ground control." Naomi frowned slightly. "You've already confirmed with the captain. Why would ground control need to be involved?" Elaine's voice remained clipped. "It's standard when there's an irregularity." A low murmur spread among the passengers. Mark Hollow muttered, "Unbelievable." Gloria Simmons shot him a sharp look. "Yes," she said, "it is." Jonas lowered his phone, recording again, capturing each second. Naomi exhaled slowly, feeling that familiar tightening of the chest, the kind that came not from fear but exhaustion. "If you need to call them, then do so. But I will not move from this seat." Elaine stiffened. "Dr. Carter, please don't make this difficult." Naomi met her eyes. I'm just sitting." Elaine opened her mouth, closed it, then turned away sharply. The sound of her heels clipped against the aisle like punctuation marks in an argument. The captain's voice came over the intercom moments later, smooth but uneasy. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a small communication delay. Please remain seated as we sort out a minor technical issue." No one believed him. Naomi felt the shift immediately, the sideways glances, the murmurs rising again. the weight of being observed. It was the kind of scrutiny that peeled layers off your composure. Jonas stood quietly, pretending to stretch. "Excuse me," he said to Gloria as he moved closer to the front. "Do you mind if I sit here for a moment?" She smiled faintly. "Not at all." He leaned toward Naomi. "I'm sorry they're putting you through this," he said softly. "I'm recording everything. If you want, I'll send it to you later." Naomi looked at him, her eyes warm despite the storm inside. "Thank you, but don't post it yet. Let's see what they do." Jonas nodded, understood. Elaine returned, accompanied by another flight attendant and a uniformed security officer who had been sitting near the back of the plane. The passengers stirred. Gloria whispered, "Good Lord." The officer approached Naomi's seat cautiously. "Ma'am, they've asked me to verify your identification. It'll only take a minute." Naomi handed over her ID once more. "Here." He checked it, compared it to a screen Elaine held, and frowned. "Everything matches." Elaine's color rose. "Well, that's strange." "The system still," Gloria interrupted. "The system seems to have a problem seeing what's right in front of it." A few passengers chuckled under their breath. The tension broke for a heartbeat, but Elaine pressed on, her pride unwilling to yield. "Captain Doyle," she called down the aisle, "can we get a direct confirmation from dispatch just to be safe?" The captain stepped out again, clearly weary. "Elaine, it's done. Sit down. We're not detaining a passenger because of your software." She hesitated, her jaw tightening. Understood, but her tone said otherwise. As she walked past Naomi, she whispered just loud enough to be heard, "Some people always have to make a scene." Naomi's hands clenched. This time, she didn't let it slide. She turned her head slowly, voice calm but resonant enough for the nearest roused to hear. "No, Ms. Porter, I didn't make the scene. You did, I just refused to leave it." A ripple of murmurs followed. Someone in the back clapped once, softly, and stopped. The silence afterward felt heavier than any applause. Elaine froze mid-step, her composure cracking. She muttered something Naomi couldn't catch and vanished behind the curtain again. Jonas looked at Naomi, impressed. "That was incredible," he whispered. Naomi gave a small smile. It shouldn't have to be. For several minutes, no one spoke. Even Mark Hollow stayed quiet, his newspaper folded neatly on his lap. Then Gloria leaned forward, her voice gentle. "You remind me of the women who marched in Selma. They didn't shout either. They just walked until the world had to listen." Naomi smiled softly. Sometimes silence carries farther than sound. Outside the window, the sun dipped toward the horizon, turning the clouds into streaks of amber and rose. The beauty of it clashed painfully with the ugliness she'd just lived through. She thought of her employees in Boston, waiting for her to arrive and present their life-saving invention. They believed in her, trusted her strength. She couldn't let this break her. Jonas quietly texted someone from the media team he knew a story is unfolding on Astrojet 6117. Keep an eye on seat 1A. He didn't know yet that, within hours, those words would ignite a storm online. As the cabin lights dimmed for evening service, Naomi finally exhaled. Her heart was steady again, but she knew peace was temporary. The eyes still followed her, some sympathetic, some suspicious. She reached for her notebook, writing in slow strokes. "Grace under pressure isn't silence, it's survival." The sentence steadied her. She could almost hear her mother's voice again. Proud, calm, whispering, "Hold steady. Naomi, the sky's still yours." By the time the plane began its slow descent, half the passengers already knew her name. The rest would soon learn it, too. When the plane leveled again, a hush settled over the cabin that felt almost unnatural. The tension from before hadn't vanished. It had only folded itself into quiet observation. Passengers whispered, exchanged looks, typed messages into their phones. The hum of the engines filled the gaps between unspoken thoughts. Naomi Carter sat completely still, her posture straight, her expression composed, but inside, the exhaustion began to pool. She had handled worse in boardrooms, but humiliation always carried a sting that logic couldn't erase. She reached for her phone and placed it gently on her lap. For a moment, she just stared at the lock screen, her mother's smiling face framed by a garden of magnolias. It was the last photo she had taken before the woman passed. Naomi had kept it as a reminder of resilience. Her mother had survived a generation that taught her to wait quietly at the back of the line. And still, she raised a daughter who built a company that now designed emergency medical systems for the entire federal network. A soft announcement broke the stillness. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are about 2 hours from Boston. Weather is clear. Cabin service will continue shortly." The captain's voice carried a hint of strain. Naomi turned off airplane mode. The signal flickered weakly, enough for a few messages to appear. Among them was one from her assistant media already asking for comment. "Someone posted a video of you on the flight." Her stomach tightened. She hadn't wanted attention, least of all this kind. But the moment Elaine had turned suspicion into spectacle, the story had escaped her control. She opened the message there. It was a short clip, 27 seconds long. In it, she sat calmly in seat 1A, hands folded, eyes steady, while Elaine hovered above her, voice sharp and condescending. The caption read, "When calm dignity meets arrogance at 30,000 feet." It had over 40,000 views. Jonas must have uploaded it. Naomi looked over her shoulder and caught him watching her. He raised his phone slightly, wordlessly apologetic. She nodded once, not in approval, not in anger, just acknowledgement. The truth was out now, and it would spread whether she liked it or not. Elaine passed through the aisle again, her steps brisk, face tight. The air between them was thick, not just with discomfort but something closer to fear. Naomi wondered if the attendant had realized that a few misplaced words might ripple into something far larger than she ever intended. Naomi turned her phone over, the screen facing down. Enough of this, she thought. She needed a moment of stillness, a place where her voice could exist without scrutiny. She unclasped her seatbelt, stood slowly, and walked toward the lavatory. Inside, the mirror reflected a woman who looked calm but tired, a woman carrying two worlds, one public, one painfully private. She ran her fingers along the sink, steadying herself, then whispered, "You're fine, Naomi. You've been fine your whole life." But even as she said it, a small tear escaped. She wiped it quickly, refusing to let it fall. When she returned to her seat, Gloria reached out and placed a hand on her arm. "You don't owe anyone your composure, dear." Naomi smiled softly. "If I lose it now, they win." Gloria's eyes glistened. Sometimes losing it is what makes them listen. Naomi thought about that. Maybe she was right, but for now she would keep her silence not as surrender, but as strategy. Moments later, her phone buzzed again. This time, the name on the screen made her blink. It was Ethan Ramirez, Chief Operating Officer of Astrojet. They had met once during a safety tech conference. She hesitated, then answered quietly, shielding her voice behind her palm. "Dr. Carter," he began without preamble. "I just got word of an incident on Flight 617. Is everything all right?" Her tone was level. "I'm fine. Your staff, however, might need some training and professionalism." He exhaled audibly. "We've seen the video. It's spreading faster than wildfire. We're already coordinating a statement, but I'd appreciate hearing what happened directly from you." She looked toward Elaine, who was now fussing with a tray cart near the front. "What happened," Naomi said slowly, "is what happens every day to people who don't look like they belong in the spaces they've earned." Ethan paused. "Understood. Would you prefer we handle this quietly or formally?" "Handle it honestly," she said. "That would be a start." When the call ended, Naomi slipped the phone back into her pocket. The conversation left her strangely lighter. It wasn't revenge she wanted, it was acknowledgement, the kind that turned apology into accountability. Across the aisle, Mark Hollow cleared his throat. "Look," he said awkwardly, "about earlier, maybe I said things I shouldn't have. It's just people make assumptions. You know?" Naomi glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Yes," she said softly. "People do." He nodded, eyes down. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a small fracture in the wall of arrogance. Jonas leaned forward slightly. "They're calling you a hero online," he whispered. Naomi shook her head. "Don't. I'm just tired." But fatigue and heroism often look the same to people who had never carried that weight. The rest of the cabin buzzed with low chatter now. A few passengers approached Naomi quietly, a young woman thanking her for her calmness, an older man offering a handshake, saying, "You handled that with grace." Naomi accepted each gesture with humility, though each one also reminded her that she'd been turned into a symbol she hadn't asked to be. Elaine avoided her completely. She busied herself in the galley, face pale, whispering into the interphone. Naomi caught fragments of the conversation. "Yes, she's still here. No, I didn't know who she was," the captain said. Then silence. Naomi leaned back, eyes closing briefly. The engines droned, and for a few minutes she allowed herself to drift. Sleep came not as rest, but as a fragile escape. When she woke, the cabin lights had dimmed to a soft amber glow. The skyline of Boston flickered faintly outside the window. A calm, female voice spoke through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent shortly. Please fasten your seat belts." Naomi straightened, slipping her notebook into her bag. Jonas tapped her shoulder lightly. "Dr. Carter, there's something you should see." He turned his phone toward her. The video had reached 500,000 views. The comments poured in outrage, solidarity, disbelief. People were tagging the airline, demanding accountability. She stared at the screen, then handed the phone back. "The internet loves a story," she murmured. "Yes," Jonas said quietly, "but sometimes it also demands justice." As the plane began its slow descent, Elaine approached one last time, her hands clasped tightly before her. "Dr. Carter, I just wanted to say I'm sorry if Naomi held up a hand gently. Ms. Porter, don't apologize because of the camera. Apologize because you finally see me." Elaine froze, eyes glistening, then nodded silently and walked away. Gloria leaned toward Naomi. "You didn't raise your voice once, and yet you made everyone listen." Naomi smiled faintly. That's the only language they never expect from us. The wheels touched the runway with a gentle thud. A round of polite applause spread through the cabin, though no one quite knew what they were applauding for relief. Tension, or the quiet victory of a woman who refused to be erased. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Naomi's phone buzzed again. A new message from Ethan Ramirez. Our CEO wants to meet you personally upon landing. She read it once, then looked out at the runway lights flickering in rhythmic intervals. Her reflection in the window looked older than she remembered, but steadier too. She whispered, "Let's see what honesty looks like at ground level." When the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began to stand. Some offered smiles, others quick nods. Naomi rose, collected her bag, and waited for the aisle to clear. Jonas lingered behind her. "You know this is only the beginning." "Right," he said. She gave a calm, knowing smile. "Yes, and maybe that's the point." The moment the aircraft door opened, Naomi Carter felt the air shift. It wasn't just the usual stale gust from the jet bridge. It was the kind of silence that arrives when people know something has already gone viral. The murmurs started before she even unbuckled her seatbelt. A few passengers hesitated, glancing her way, unsure if they should speak. Others whispered her name as though repeating a secret. She rose slowly, her movements deliberate, each motion a reminder that grace was still hers to command. Elaine stood by the door, trying to mask her anxiety beneath a professional smile. "Thank you for flying Astrojet, Dr. Carter." Her voice trembled slightly on the title. Naomi nodded, neither cold nor forgiving. "Thank you, Ms. Porter. Take care." It was the kind of civility that carried its own weight, a boundary disguised as politeness. Jonas was just behind her, phone in hand, ready for anything. Gloria followed too, steadying herself with her cane. "You're not alone in this, dear," she whispered. Naomi smiled faintly, grateful but focused. As Naomi stepped into the terminal, the first thing she saw was a cluster of people waiting near the gate. 2 suited men, 1 woman in a navy coat, and a few passengers pretending to scroll their phones while obviously recording. Cameras had a way of multiplying when stories broke loose. A tall man in his 40s approached first, expression taut with worry. "Dr. Carter, I'm Ethan Ramirez." She extended her hand, firm but calm. "Mr. Ramirez, I figured we'd be speaking sooner rather than later." Ethan nodded. "We appreciate your time. Our CEO, Lillian Ward, is joining us shortly. She insisted on meeting you in person before you leave the terminal." Naomi's brows lifted slightly. "That's rare," he sighed. "So is what happened." They began walking toward the VIP lounge, the quiet buzz of the terminal humming around them. Jonas trailed discreetly behind, documenting from a respectful distance. Elaine followed a few paces back, summoned by the internal protocol to debrief with management. Her uniform suddenly felt heavier than it had all day. Inside the lounge, everything gleamed brushed steel, glass, soft lighting. Naomi took a seat near the window, placing her bag beside her, posture straight but relaxed. Ethan stood by the door, speaking into his headset. "Yes, she's here. Understood." Moments later, Lillian Ward entered. She was tall, poised, her silver hair pulled into a neat twist, the kind of woman who carried authority like a scent measured, invisible, but unmistakable. "Dr. Carter," she began, extending her hand. "I'm deeply sorry for what you experienced. It shouldn't have happened on any flight, let alone one bearing our company's name." Naomi shook her hand, her tone steady. Apology accepted, but I'm less interested in words than in what comes next. Lillian gestured toward a chair. Of course, please, sit. Elaine entered quietly, her presence awkward in the polished space. Her eyes flicked between Naomi and her superiors. Lillian turned to her. Ms. Porter, before we discuss next steps, I'd like you to recount the events as you remember them. Elaine swallowed hard. I followed standard procedure. There was a discrepancy in the manifest, and when I tried to verify, Dr. Carter became what Naomi asked softly, but her question cut through the air like glass. Elaine faltered, uncooperative. Naomi leaned forward, her voice calm but powerful. Uncooperative is an interesting word. It usually means someone refused to surrender their dignity quietly. Lillian's expression didn't change, but her gaze hardened on Elaine. Did you or did you not confirm the ticket before escalating to the captain? Elaine's voice shrank. Yes, but no, but... Lillian interrupted. That's where the failure began. Ethan handed Lillian a tablet. We've reviewed the footage. Ma'am, there's no ambiguity. Elaine looked at Naomi, eyes glassy. I didn't know who you were. Naomi exhaled. Not angry, just tired. That's the point. Ms. Porter, you shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with respect. Silence settled over the room. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to quiet. Lillian folded her hands. Dr. Carter, I won't insult you by offering scripted apologies, but I can promise accountability. We're launching an immediate investigation and retraining for our entire staff. I'd also like to extend an invitation to collaborate with us on developing an anti-bias framework for our service protocols. You've clearly built systems that save lives. Perhaps you can help us build one that saves humanity. Naomi studied her, surprised by the sincerity. That's an unexpected offer. It's also necessary, Lillian said simply. You've given us an opportunity to be better, even if it came at your expense. Elaine looked down at her hands. Shame, real and heavy, finally took root. Naomi leaned back. If we're going to do this, it has to be more than a public gesture. No quick press release, no shallow training, real structure, real consequences. Agreed, Lillian said without hesitation. And I'd like to start by asking what justice looks like for you personally. Naomi paused. Justice, she said slowly, would mean that the next time a young black girl boards your plane, she isn't asked to prove she belongs before she's allowed to breathe. Ethan lowered his eyes. The words struck something human in him, something corporate training could never touch. Lillian nodded. Then that will be our measure. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The storm outside the window had begun to roll in soft flashes of lightning reflected against the glass, distant thunder muffled by altitude. Jonas, still recording discreetly, whispered to Gloria, "This moment, right here, it's bigger than the video." Gloria smiled faintly. That's because she's turning anger into something that builds. Elaine stood silently, her voice a whisper. Dr. Carter, I truly am sorry. Naomi looked at her, not unkindly, but with a depth that made the apology feel small. I believe you, she said. But belief isn't enough. Change is. Elaine nodded, tears welling but unshed. Lillian turned toward Naomi. There's a press team waiting outside. We can make a statement together if you're willing. I'd rather the world hear this story from both sides, not conflict but correction. Naomi thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. let's tell it right then. When they stepped outside the lounge, flashes erupted instantly. Reporters had already gathered, microphones raised like eager questions. Lillian spoke first, voice crisp and clear. Today, Astrojet failed one of our passengers, a woman whose calm exposed our flaws more powerfully than anger ever could. Dr. Naomi Carter reminded us that dignity is not a privilege to be granted, but a right to be respected. We will not treat this as an isolated incident, but as a catalyst for reform. Naomi stepped forward, her tone quiet yet commanding. I didn't come here to destroy a company. I came here to challenge the culture that allows doubt to masquerade as policy. If we can turn discomfort into dialogue, then maybe this flight wasn't wasted after all. The crowd fell silent for a moment before a single reporter asked, Dr. Carter, will you be taking legal action? She smiled gently. Justice doesn't always begin in courtrooms. Sometimes it begins in conversations like this. The cameras clicked furiously. Somewhere behind her, Elaine wiped her eyes. Jonas captured the shot that would circle the world within the hour, Naomi standing before the cameras, composed and luminous against the storm-dark glass. A quiet revolution embodied in one woman's poise. Later, as the press dispersed, Lillian turned to her. You could have demanded our destruction, and you didn't. Why? Naomi's answer was simple. Because rebuilding is harder and worth more. That night, as she finally left the terminal, her phone buzzed again. A message from Jonas read, the video hit 3 million views. They're calling you the Calm at 30,000 feet. Naomi smiled softly to herself, walking through the rain-slick sidewalk toward her car. The title didn't matter. What mattered was that people were finally listening. The sky over Boston had turned a bruised shade of violet by the time Naomi Carter stepped out of the terminal. The rain had started to fall thin, sharp, relentless. The terminal lights cast reflections on the wet pavement, turning every puddle into a mirror of the night. Her driver waited quietly by the car door, but Naomi paused before getting in. She needed air, space, silence. She pulled her coat tighter, letting the rain sting her skin. For the first time all day, no one was watching, no cameras, no whispers, just the sound of water on glass and the city breathing around her. She closed her eyes and exhaled, a deep, weary sound that seemed to carry both relief and ache. Inside her chest, something shifted. What had happened wasn't just an incident. It was a fracture that had forced light to pour through. The world had seen her calm, her dignity, her poise, but they hadn't seen the cost. She finally climbed into the back seat. Home, please, she said softly. The car glided through the wet streets, headlights cutting through mist. On her phone, messages kept appearing, news outlets, board members, even old acquaintances she hadn't heard from in years. The video now had nearly 10 million views. Every major network had picked it up. Hashtags like "The Calm at 30K feet" and "She Belongs" here were trending globally. Naomi scrolled through the messages, pausing on one from her assistant. Clara board meeting rescheduled. Investors want your statement tomorrow. Press calling non-stop. Also, Viridian shares are up 7%. Naomi let out a small, humorless laugh. Even in outrage, people measured worth in numbers. When she arrived home, her apartment felt too still, too curated. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city skyline, the lights blurring through the rain. She dropped her bag on the couch, took off her shoes, and stood barefoot by the window. Her reflection stared back composed, elegant, untouchable, but she knew better. She touched the glass lightly. "Is this what strength looks like?" she whispered. "Or is it just survival with better posture?" The silence didn't answer. Her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID read Marcus Shaw, her best friend from college and legal counsel for Viridian Biotech. Naomi answered. "Tell me you have something good to say." Marcus's voice was warm but edged with tension. "Depends how you define good. You've become the face of corporate bias reform overnight. Congratulations, you're a symbol." She sighed. "I didn't ask to be one. No one ever does, but it's happening. I've been fielding calls from Washington. Someone from the Department of Transportation wants to meet you next week, and Lillian Ward's PR team is drafting a joint statement for tomorrow morning." Naomi paced the room. "A statement won't fix culture." "Marcus, I know, but it can open the door for something bigger. You've got their attention. Now you get to decide what to do with it." She stopped by her desk, where an old photo of her and her mother sat beside a wilted orchid. Her mother's eyes seemed to look right through the chaos, as if reminding her that dignity was only powerful when it led to purpose. "I think I already know," she said softly. "What are you thinking?" Naomi's eyes drifted to the city outside. "I want to create something real: training, accountability, mentorship, not just for airlines, but for every industry that hides its bias behind policy." Marcus whistled low. "That's not small. Neither is the problem." He chuckled. "You always did think in systems. I'll help you structure it, but first sleep. You'll need your voice for tomorrow." When the call ended, Naomi poured herself a glass of water and sat by the window again. The rain had softened, turning into a slow drizzle. Down below, a delivery driver sprinted through the crosswalk. A woman held her umbrella over a stranger, and a group of teenagers laughed under the awning of a cafe. Life went on messy, imperfect, human. She whispered to herself, "Maybe this is what healing looks like. Small kindnesses in a loud world." She finally went to bed, though sleep came late. Dreams flickered in broken pieces: her mother's voice, the cabin lights, Elaine's trembling apology, the flash of cameras. She woke before dawn to the faint sound of thunder, and the glow of her phone lightened the room. A message from Jonas. "They're calling you the modern-day Rosa Parks of the sky. CNN wants an interview. Don't say no yet." Naomi set the phone aside. She wasn't ready to be a symbol, not yet, but she was ready to build something that lasted longer than headlines. By morning, the rain had cleared. Sunlight spilled across the city like forgiveness. She brewed coffee, the scent filling the quiet apartment, and began writing notes on a yellow pad. The words came easily now: framework, reform, inclusion, dignity metrics, equity review board. She wrote until the page filled, until the ache in her chest began to ease. At 9, her assistant buzzed in. "Ms. Carter, Lillian Ward is on the line. She's at Astrojet headquarters with media. They're asking if you'll join the live announcement." Naomi hesitated. "Is Elaine there?" "Yes, she's part of the statement." Naomi's lips curved faintly. "Good. Patch me through." The large screen in her living room flickered to life. Lillian appeared, standing behind a podium flanked by Astrojet logos. Elaine stood beside her, pale but resolute. "Lillian began today marks not just an apology, but a turning point. Astrojet will partner with Viridian Biotech to create the Altitude Initiative, a cross-industry program promoting ethical awareness, empathy, and unbiased service. The cameras turned to Naomi's remote feed. She spoke clearly, her voice steady as sunlight. When systems fail, people. It's not technology that's broken, it's empathy. We can't program respect, but we can teach it. This partnership is a promise that dignity won't depend on appearance, status, or seat number. Reporters shouted questions, but Naomi kept her focus. One asked, "Dr. Carter, do you forgive what happened?" Naomi paused. "Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I remember so that others won't have to live it." Lillian added quietly, "And we remember so we don't repeat it." Applause filled the room. As the conference ended, Naomi's phone buzzed with another message from an unknown number. It read, "You don't know me, but I was that girl who used to hide my badge at work so no one would question if I belonged. You made me stop hiding. Thank you." Naomi stared at the message, tears finally falling, unforced, quiet, real. She typed a single reply, "You've always belonged." That night, she sat again by her window, the city glowing below. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered, not as fear, but as promise. The rain had washed something clean, not the world, but her resolve. Naomi Carter smiled softly and whispered into the empty room, "Tomorrow, we start building." 2 weeks later, Naomi Carter stood in the 22nd floor boardroom of Viridian Biotech, overlooking Boston Harbor. The air smelled faintly of rain and espresso, the kind of morning where sunlight fought its way through clouds like a slow confession. Around the long glass table, her executive team murmured in low tones, each voice heavy with curiosity, admiration, or unease. Everyone knew why they were here. What had started as a mid-air humiliation had become a global movement, and Viridian's role in it was no longer optional, it was destiny. Naomi adjusted the cuff of her cream blazer, calm but unmistakably in command. "Thank you all for coming early," she began, her voice measured yet firm. "We have an opportunity not just to lead in technology, but in humanity. I won't waste it." Across the table, CFO Dennis Caldwell leaned forward, the kind of man who spoke numbers before empathy. "Naomi, before we start idealizing this, I have to ask, are we sure tying Viridian to Astrojet scandal is smart? Public sentiment can shift fast. We could look opportunistic." Naomi met his gaze without blinking. "This isn't opportunism. Dennis, it's accountability. When one system fails, others should learn. We're not attaching ourselves to scandal, we're anchoring ourselves to change." He frowned slightly, unused to her directness carrying such quiet conviction. Marcus Shaw, sitting to her right, smiled faintly. "I think what Dr. Carter's saying is that ethics isn't just good PR, it's good business." Naomi nodded. "Exactly. Investors care about social impact. Employees want purpose. If we're building tools to protect lives, shouldn't we also protect the dignity of the people we serve?" The room fell silent for a beat. Then, from the far end, Ko-o, Leela Jang spoke softly. "You're proposing we expand Viridian's work beyond biotech?" "Yes," Naomi replied. "I want to launch a division focused entirely on ethical integration and intersection between technology and justice. We'll partner with Astrojet under the Altitude Initiative. But the larger goal is broader: create measurable frameworks for corporate empathy, a system that tracks not just compliance, but compassion." Lila's eyes lit with cautious excitement. Like an index of human-centered responsibility, Naomi smiled. "Exactly. something that forces companies to ask not just what they do, but how they make people feel. Dennis exhaled. And how do we fund this? Naomi turned to the screen behind her, pressing a button on the remote. The wall came alive with slides, figures, projections, testimonials. We don't need to fund it alone. Since the incident, Viridian's visibility has increased 20-fold. We've received proposals from 4 major partners, 2 NGOs, 1 government grant, and an independent equity firm focused on social impact. The money is waiting. What's missing is the courage to say yes. The words hung in the air, bold yet serene. Marcus looked around the table. I say we move forward. This isn't about risk anymore, it's about relevance. Slowly, heads began to nod. Even Dennis, after a long pause, gave a reluctant shrug. Fine, but let's make sure our messaging doesn't sound like moral preaching. Naomi's lips curved. Then we'll make sure it sounds like truth. Applause rippled softly through the room, not loud, but sincere. As the team filed out, Naomi remained by the window, gazing out at the harbor where ferries traced silver lines across the water. Marcus lingered behind. You handled that perfectly, he said. She smiled. You mean I didn't throw a chair? He chuckled. You never need to. Your quiet is louder than most people shouting. Her expression softened. You know, Marcus, sometimes I wonder if the world listens to me now because they finally see me or because they saw me humiliated first. He paused, maybe both, but either way, they're listening. Use it. She nodded slowly. I will. Later that afternoon, Naomi arrived at Astrojet headquarters for a scheduled strategy session with Lillian Ward. The building gleamed with glass and marble, a corporate cathedral that smelled faintly of citrus and power. Inside, everything moved with precision, employees walking briskly, receptionists speaking in tones trained for neutrality. Lillian greeted her in the executive lounge, all warmth and grace. Naomi, you've caused quite the revolution. Naomi smiled politely. I prefer to think of it as a rebalancing. They sat together, papers spread between them. We've already begun internal audits, Lillian said. Anonymous feedback lines, empathy evaluations, bias training modules, but I want more than workshops. I want something that reshapes how our people see passengers and themselves. Naomi tapped her pen thoughtfully. Then start with stories. Data changes minds, but stories change hearts. People remember what they feel. Lillian nodded. You sound like my late husband. He used to say leadership isn't about direction, it's about reflection. Naomi smiled softly. Wise man. As they spoke, Elaine Porter entered quietly. Holding a folder, she looked different, smaller somehow, humbled by the weeks that had passed. Dr. Carter, Ms. Ward, I've compiled staff feedback from the last 2 weeks. Naomi gestured for her to sit. How have you been? Ms. Porter Elaine hesitated, then answered truthfully. Learning. Not just about procedure, but about people. I didn't realize how often I saw faces as profiles instead of stories. Naomi regarded her with empathy. Awareness is the first step. What you do next matters more. Elaine nodded, voice low. I've volunteered to help with the new training program. I'd like to tell my side not to excuse it, but to help others recognize what bias looks like before it becomes harm. Lillian smiled. I think that's exactly the kind of accountability we need. For the first time, Naomi saw not the woman who had doubted her, but one trying to rebuild. She extended her hand. Then let's rebuild it together. Elaine hesitated before taking it, tears glistening at the edge of her lashes. The meeting ended with real plans and quiet hope. As Naomi left the building, reporters waiting outside shouted her name, flashing cameras. She offered a small wave but didn't stop. The story wasn't about spectacle anymore. It was about structure. That evening, back at Viridian, Naomi sat alone in her office. The city glowed beneath her, every light a heartbeat. On her desk lay a letter, handwritten and postmarked from New Orleans. She opened it carefully. Dear Dr. Carter, I'm writing from a small town where my daughter wants to be a pilot. She watched your video 10 times and said, Mama, she didn't even yell. She just made the world listen. I think she's braver now because of you. Thank you for showing her that strength can be soft. Sincerely, Renee Thompson. Naomi read it twice, then a third time. Her throat tightened. She placed the letter beside her mother's photo and whispered, We're still teaching. Mama. Outside. Thunder rolled faintly over the harbor, soft and distant. Naomi turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the city and the hum of purpose that had begun to replace the ache of injustice. Tomorrow, new meetings would come, new challenges, new scrutiny. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest in the rare quiet of knowing she'd turned pain into blueprint, humiliation into movement. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was fighting gravity. She was rewriting its laws. By the end of the month, the city seemed to hum with Naomi Carter's name. It wasn't just the press anymore. Schools, universities, and corporate roundtables had begun using her story as a case study. The Altitude Initiative was no longer a press release but a living model, adopted by 3 other airlines and 2 Fortune 500 companies. The movement she'd sparked had outgrown her, and somehow that was the most humbling part. On a quiet Friday morning, Naomi sat in her office, surrounded by scattered drafts of the first Empathy Index report. The air smelled faintly of coffee and paper ink. Outside, Boston shimmered beneath spring sunlight. Inside, her mind churned with numbers, definitions, and the weight of what it meant to measure something as human as empathy. Marcus entered, balancing 2 cups of coffee. You're still at it. She smiled faintly, trying to turn decency into data. It's harder than building a microchip. He chuckled, setting 1 cup beside her, and twice as dangerous. People don't like being told how kind they're not. Naomi leaned back. That's the problem, isn't it? Everyone wants to be seen as good. No one wants to do the work that makes them better. He sipped his coffee, then said, You're starting to sound like a philosopher instead of a CEO. She smiled softly. Maybe that's what CEOs were supposed to be in the first place. Before he could reply, Clara, her assistant, appeared at the door. Dr. Carter. There's a visitor here asking to see you. She says it's personal. Naomi frowned, who she wouldn't give her last name, just said her first name is Diane. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Mysterious. Naomi hesitated, then nodded. Send her in. A few moments later, a woman stepped inside a modest figure in her 50s, wearing a faded navy coat and holding a small leather folder. Her eyes were sharp but nervous. Dr. Carter, she began softly. I'm Diane Whitfield. I used to work for Astrojet. I was a gate supervisor at Logan. I think you deserve to know what really happened that day. Naomi gestured for her to sit. Go on. Diane's fingers tightened around the folder. I was the one who first flagged your seat. The The system had double-listed it due to a software glitch. I told the crew it was being corrected, but the lead flight attendant, Elaine Porter, insisted she handle it herself. When I saw how she spoke to you, I reported it immediately, but someone in mid-level management deleted my report before it reached compliance. Naomi's heartbeat quickened. You're sure? Diane nodded, sliding a printed page across the desk. I saved a copy before it vanished. Look at the timestamp. It's the exact moment you were boarding. Marcus leaned closer, scanning the document. His expression darkened. So the bias wasn't just personal, it was protected. Diane looked down. After I sent the report, I was told I'd been restructured. I lost my job a week later. I stayed quiet because I needed the severance, but after seeing you speak at the altitude event, I couldn't keep that silence anymore. Naomi felt a mix of admiration and sorrow. You risked your livelihood for truth. That matters. Diane gave a small, sad smile. I just didn't want another woman to go through what you did. Naomi stood, walking around the desk. Ms. Whitfield, you've just given us proof that this was bigger than one crew member. May I keep this? Please, Diane said. Do something with it. Make sure they can't hide it again. As she left, Naomi watched her go, the folder heavy in her hands. Marcus exhaled sharply. You realize this changes everything. If management suppressed this, Astrojet's reform wasn't voluntary, it was self-preservation. Naomi nodded slowly. Then we don't stop at reform. We go deeper. That night, Naomi met with Lillian Ward in a private room at a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor. The city lights shimmered across the water, reflections rippling like restless thoughts. Lillian looked tired but attentive. Naomi placed the document on the table. This was sent before the flight took off. The report never reached your desk. Lillian read the paper carefully, her jaw tightening. I didn't know. I believe you, Naomi said, but someone beneath you did. They protected bias because it was convenient. Lillian set the paper down, her voice low. Then I'll find out who. I promise you that. Naomi looked at her steadily. Lillian, this isn't just about punishment. It's about proof. If we want to rebuild trust, transparency must come first. Let me handle the internal audit alongside your compliance team. Independent review, full public release. Lillian hesitated, then nodded. You're right. Let's do it. No half measures. The next morning, the announcement went live. Astrojet and Viridian Biotech would co-lead an independent investigation into procedural discrimination and data suppression. The press called it unprecedented. The stock market called it reckless. Naomi called it necessary. Back at her office, Jonas Lee stopped by, camera slung over his shoulder. You've gone from victim to investigator. How does it feel to be holding the magnifying glass now? Naomi smiled faintly. Heavy, but the view's clearer from here. Jonas grinned. You know, they want me to do a feature documentary. 30,000 feet. The flight that changed everything. I want you in it. Naomi shook her head gently. Not as a star. Jonas, as a storyteller. Make it about what happened, not who it happened to. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. That's exactly why people trust you. Later that evening, Naomi sat at her desk again, reviewing draft statements when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Elaine Porter. Dr. Carter, I just wanted you to know I saw the audit news. I'm ready to testify if needed. Whatever it takes to fix what I helped break. Naomi typed back, Doing the right thing now matters more than what came before. Thank you." She set the phone down and turned off the lamp, watching the city fade into twilight. The rain returned, gentle against the glass. For a long time, she simply listened to the hum of the building, to the distant horns from the harbor, to the echo of a world slowly awakening to its reflection. The next morning, when Naomi arrived at Viridian, the lobby was filled with employees waiting for her. Some held signs that read, "We believe in the initiative." Others simply clapped as she walked by. Clara whispered, "They started gathering an hour ago. They just wanted to see you walk in." Naomi smiled, touched beyond words. "Then let's make it worth their faith." She took the elevator to her office, Diane's folder still under her arm. The fight wasn't over, it had just changed form. But for the first time since that flight, Naomi no longer felt like she was defending herself. She was defending something far larger. And as the elevator doors closed, she thought of her mother again, the voice that had carried her through storms and silence alike. "Baby, dignity isn't a destination, it's a direction," Naomi whispered to the reflection in the mirror like steel. "Then, let's keep walking." The following week began like calm before another storm. The headlines had softened, but the undercurrent of scrutiny only grew stronger. Every news outlet wanted an update on the investigation. Astrojet's leadership faced questions, shareholders demanded answers, and whispers from the aviation world hinted that more than one airline had similar ghosts in their data. For Naomi Carter, the work had shifted from outrage to orchestration. She was no longer fighting for her seat. She was redesigning the whole cabin. On Monday morning, she walked into the Astrojet headquarters, the glass doors reflecting her image like a double, the woman she had been before the flight, and the one she had become since. She was greeted not by cameras this time, but by quiet nods of respect. The same employees who once avoided her gaze now stood taller when she passed, as if her presence reminded them that accountability could coexist with hope. Lillian Ward waited in the boardroom, surrounded by folders and digital reports projected onto the wall. The light from the screens cast pale blue shadows across her face. "It's worse than we thought," she said as Naomi entered. Naomi closed the door. How bad? Lillian turned the tablet toward her. The internal audit uncovered at least 6 instances in the last 2 years where employees flagged racial profiling or discriminatory treatment, each one resolved without documentation. Someone in mid-management buried them. Naomi frowned, scanning the report. "Who signed off on the resolutions, Harold Pike?" Lillian said quietly. "Senior Operations Director. He retired last quarter with a full pension. But we also found emails connecting him to a network of managers across regional branches who deliberately minimized bias complaints. They called it containment." Naomi sat back slowly. Containment. A word that sounds clinical until you realize it means silencing people. Lillian's voice tightened. "I'm preparing to hand this over to federal investigators. But I want you to be part of the public statement. People trust you more than they trust us right now." Naomi met her eyes. "Then let's tell the truth together." Later that afternoon, Marcus joined her for the press briefing preparations. He placed a thin folder on her desk labeled DOJ Coordination Notes. His tone was calm but firm. "Once this goes public, you'll have government oversight. It won't just be a story, it'll be a federal case." Naomi nodded. "That's exactly what it needs to be." He hesitated, then added, "You're aware this might reopen the wounds you've been trying to close?" She smiled faintly. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means facing it without fear. That evening, the press conference took place in a glass atrium overlooking the city. Cameras lined the room, but this time the narrative belonged to her. Lillian spoke first, announcing the findings and acknowledging systemic negligence. Then she handed the microphone to Naomi, who stepped forward with quiet authority. "When I boarded that plane," Naomi began, "I was treated like a question that needed to be verified. But what I've learned since is that the real question was never about my ticket. It was about how systems choose who gets believed first. We've uncovered evidence that others were silenced, not just by individuals, but by an organized pattern of avoidance. It stops today." The crowd leaned in. Her tone was calm, measured, but the words carried weight like a gavel. "I don't want another apology. I want structure. Accountability is not punishment. It's alignment. When companies fail to hold people responsible, they tell the world that silence is acceptable. From this moment forward, silence is over." The room erupted with flashes and questions. Reporters shouted, "Dr. Carter, do you believe Astrojet deliberately protected discrimination?" Naomi paused before answering. "I believe convenience often disguises itself as ignorance, and ignorance is no longer an excuse." Lillian nodded beside her, her expression resolute. "Dr. Carter and Viridian Biotech will oversee the creation of the Empathy Integrity Council, an independent review body with authority to audit our culture, not our profits." For a brief second, the world seemed to exhale. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was sincere. After the conference, Naomi stepped outside alone. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the harbor. The noise of the cameras faded behind her, replaced by the low hum of the city. She tilted her face upward, watching a plane cross the dark sky. It shimmered briefly, a distant light tracing its way through the clouds. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Diane Whitfield. "They're interviewing me tomorrow. Thank you for giving me courage." Naomi typed back, "You gave it to yourself. I just reminded you it was still there." As she slipped the phone into her coat, Jonas appeared from around the corner, camera bag slung over his shoulder. "You were brilliant in there," he said. "No theatrics, just truth." "Truth doesn't need volume," Naomi said softly. "It just needs space to be heard." Jonas smiled. "You know, we're almost done with the documentary. But I've been thinking the story's not really about what happened on that flight. It's about what happens when people refuse to stay silent." She nodded. "Then tell it that way." He hesitated. "There's one last shot I want for the film. You, at Logan Airport, in the same terminal, standing where it began." Naomi's eyes lingered on the skyline. "When, tomorrow morning, first light," she thought for a moment, then smiled, "I'll be there." The next morning. The terminal was nearly empty when she arrived. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and coffee ordinary, familiar, almost sacred. Jonas set up the camera near the wide windows overlooking the runway. "Ready?" he asked. Naomi nodded. "Let's begin." He rolled the camera as she stood near the gate, the same kind of gate where her life had shifted course. The early sun poured through the glass, painting her silhouette in gold. She spoke quietly, not rehearsed, just honest. Sometimes change doesn't begin with noise. It begins with someone refusing to move, refusing to shrink, refusing to let humiliation define them. "That day, I didn't fight to be right. I fought to be seen. And now, I fight so that others won't have to." Jonas lowered the camera slowly, visibly moved. "Perfect," he whispered. She turned toward the window, watching a plane lift into the sky, its wings slicing through morning light. For the first time, the sight didn't bring the sting of memory. It brought peace. By noon, the footage had already gone viral. The final scene, her standing alone at the gate, voice soft but unwavering, was shared across millions of screens. One comment under the video captured the essence of it all. She didn't raise her voice, but she raised the standard. That evening, Naomi returned to her office at Viridian. The Empathy Index report draft was finally complete. On the cover, she had written a simple dedication for everyone who was ever asked to prove they belonged. She signed her name below it, setting down her pen. The window beside her framed the skyline, where the same golden hue she'd stood under that morning now melted into twilight. Marcus entered quietly, holding a folder. The DOJ just released a statement. They're opening an investigation into corporate bias suppression practices across all major airlines. Your case was the catalyst. Naomi smiled softly. Then, maybe turbulence has a purpose. He chuckled. You're not just rewriting their playbook, Naomi. You're rewriting what justice looks like. She turned back to the window, her reflection merging with the city lights. Justice, she said thoughtfully, isn't about revenge. It's about recognition. And once people are seen, they don't disappear again. Outside, the city pulsed with motion cars, lights, stories, lives, and somewhere above it all, planes cut across the clouds, carrying people of every color, every story, every dream. Naomi imagined each of them taking off with a little more faith that they belonged up there too. As the office lights dimmed, she whispered to herself, "We're just getting started." Spring in Washington carried the scent of blooming cherry trees and quiet tension. The city's rhythm felt both ceremonial and electric, as though history itself was taking shallow breaths before something irreversible. Naomi Carter stepped out of the black sedan and stood before the marble steps of the Capitol's committee hall. Cameras flared in a soft staccato of light. A dozen microphones pointed toward her like mechanical pedals seeking her warmth. She wasn't there as a CEO or a victim. Now she was there as a voice for those who had been silenced too long. She walked with steady grace, flanked by Marcus Shaw and Lillian Ward. Behind them trailed representatives from Astrojet, Viridian Biotech, and the new Empathy Integrity Council. The hearing was set to address systemic discrimination across corporate air travel, an issue that had begun with one flight and one woman who refused to shrink. As Naomi entered the chamber, the murmur of the audience dimmed to respectful silence. The air inside felt heavier than any boardroom she'd ever stood in. Rows of senators sat beneath the ornate ceiling, their expressions varying from intrigue to skepticism. At the center sat Chairwoman Alicia Cortez, a woman known for her composure and fierce intellect. "Dr. Carter," Cortez began, her tone even, "thank you for being here. We've reviewed your submitted evidence. You may begin with your statement." Naomi adjusted the microphone. "Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm here not to recount humiliation, but to outline transformation. What began as one isolated act of prejudice revealed a system that rewarded silence and disguised bias as procedure. Through the Altitude Initiative and our ongoing investigations, we discovered a pattern. Employees who reported discriminatory incidents were either ignored, penalized, or erased from records. These aren't glitches, they're decisions. Cortez leaned forward. Are you suggesting deliberate concealment by corporate leadership? Naomi met her gaze. Not leadership in its entirety, but certainly by those who believed protecting the brand mattered more than protecting people. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Marcus passed her a discreet nod, steady, measured. She continued, her voice soft but unyielding. When a woman of color is told she doesn't belong in a seat she paid for, the harm isn't only personal, it's structural. It tells every marginalized person watching that dignity is conditional. We can't legislate empathy, but we can design systems that make bias harder to hide and easier to confront. She paused, letting the silence work in her favor. That is what our empathy index measures. That is what the Council enforces. And that is why we're here to ensure accountability doesn't stop at apologies. Across the room, a senator in his 60s, stern and skeptical, adjusted his glasses. Dr. Carter, while your story's moving, some may argue that emotions don't govern economics. How do you quantify compassion? Naomi smiled faintly. With consistency. We've developed metrics that track complaint patterns, retention rates among underrepresented employees, and the language used in service feedback. You'd be surprised how often bias hides behind customer satisfaction scores. A low murmur of approval echoed from the audience. Even the senator seemed momentarily disarmed. Cortez leaned back. Dr. Carter, some would call what you're doing revolutionary. Naomi shook her head gently. Revolution is loud. What we're doing is quieter. It's evolution, the kind that lasts. From the side rows, Diane Whitfield sat nervously, waiting for her turn to testify. When Naomi stepped back, Diane rose, clutching her folder like armor. Her voice trembled at first but grew stronger with every word as she confirmed how her report had been buried and her job taken. Elaine Porter sat a few seats away, tears silently tracing her cheeks. When the testimonies ended, Chairwoman Cortez looked toward Naomi again. Dr. Carter, in your own words, what do you believe true reform requires? Naomi's gaze swept across the room. Courage without comfort, accountability without performance, and leaders who understand that dignity isn't a courtesy, it's a right. The audience broke into quiet applause, a ripple of sound that felt both reverent and resolute. After the session, reporters flooded the marble steps. Jonas Lee was among them, camera in hand, eyes bright with purpose. Dr. Carter, the nation just watched your testimony live. How does it feel knowing you may have changed federal policy? Naomi offered a soft, almost wistful smile. Change doesn't happen in one room. It happens when ordinary people start expecting more from extraordinary systems. Jonas lowered his camera. You realize they're already calling this the Carter hearing. She laughed lightly. Names fade. What matters is what follows. That evening, Naomi returned to her hotel, exhausted but strangely at peace. She stood by the window overlooking the Potomac, its waters shimmering under the city lights. Her phone buzzed a call from Gloria Simmons, the gentle woman from that unforgettable flight. Naomi, I watched the hearing, Gloria said, her voice warm with pride. You carried every one of us with you. Naomi's eyes softened. You were the first person to tell me not to stay quiet. I just finally learned what that really meant. Keep going, child, Gloria murmured. You're doing more than fighting back. You're building forward. After the call. Naomi sat on the edge of her bed, exhaustion folding around her like a blanket. She thought about the journey, the disbelief, the humiliation, the quiet power that had risen from it all. She whispered to herself, maybe this is what justice feels like, not loud, not triumphant, just honest. The next morning brought another surprise. Her assistant, Clara, rushed into the suite holding a stack of newspapers. Across every front page, Naomi's face appeared beneath the headline, Dr. Carter's Testimony Sparks Corporate Accountability Bill. The subheadline read, New Legislation Proposes Federal Oversight on Discrimination Metrics in the Aviation Industry. Naomi read it twice. Then she closed her eyes, smiling faintly. So it begins. Later that week, she met again with Lillian Ward and Marcus Shaw at Viridian's Boston headquarters. The mood was different, lighter, yet purposeful. They gathered in the same conference room where it had all started, but this time, hope filled the space instead of hesitation. We're expanding the Empathy Council, Lillian said. Federal funding means we can reach more sectors, hospitality, tech, even government services. Are you ready for that? Naomi looked around the room, her reflection shimmering faintly in the glass wall. Ready? No, but I'm willing. That's better. Marcus smiled. You know what I love about you? You make moral clarity look like strategy. Naomi chuckled. That's because it is. They talked for hours, drafting frameworks, setting goals. Outside, the harbor gleamed under the afternoon sun. Every ripple of water seemed to mirror the quiet ripple she had sent into the world months ago, a ripple that had become a current strong enough to move nations. Before leaving, Naomi walked to the terrace overlooking the water. She breathed in the salt air, feeling the wind catch her curls. She thought about her mother again, about magnolias blooming after storms. She thought of little girls like Renee's daughter, looking at the sky not as something distant, but as something waiting. She whispered softly, We're not done yet. Summer sunlight spilled through the windows of the Viridian Biotech atrium like liquid gold. The building was alive with energy reporters, executives, students, and flight crews gathered for what was being called the Day of Dignity. Naomi Carter stood near the stage, her reflection caught in the glass walls, heart steady but full. The months of hearings, reforms, and sleepless nights had brought her to this moment the official signing of the Corporate Accountability and Equity Act. It was a bill born from her testimony, written with data from her empathy index, and supported by citizens who believed decency should no longer be optional. Marcus Shaw stood beside her, reviewing the speech one last time. You ready? He asked softly. Naomi smiled, eyes bright. For once? I think I am. He chuckled. You always say that right before you do something historic. She laughed quietly. Let's hope this one sticks. At the podium, the murmur of voices fell into silence as Chairwoman Alicia Cortez, now a national figure of reform, introduced her. When courage meets clarity, we move forward as a people. Dr. Naomi Carter didn't just demand accountability, she designed it. Applause filled the atrium as Naomi stepped forward. Her black suit gleamed subtly under the lights, simple yet commanding. She looked across the sea of faces, leaders, workers, mothers, students, and took a slow breath. When I boarded Flight 6117 months ago, she began. I had no idea I was walking into the moment that would test everything I believed about fairness. I didn't plan to become a symbol or a movement. I was just a woman trying to sit in a seat she had earned. But what happened next revealed something bigger. how invisible walls still live inside systems that claim to be equal. The crowd listened, breath held. Her tone wasn't fiery, but full of quiet conviction, like someone telling a truth too deep for anger. We've talked about justice for decades as if it's something distant, something waiting in courtrooms and policies. But justice begins in smaller places in the way we greet someone, in the way we believe a voice we don't expect to hear. The work we've done together, this legislation, this index, this movement proves that accountability is not punishment. It's protection. Protection of what makes us human. She paused, eyes glistening. The sky belongs to everyone, and so does dignity. Applause thundered through the hall, echoing up to the high glass ceiling. For a brief second, she felt her mother's presence in that sound, the whisper of magnolias blooming somewhere unseen. When the signing ceremony began, Lillian Ward approached the table beside Cortez, hand trembling slightly as she signed her name beneath the act's title. Then Naomi added hers. The cameras flashed, but Naomi's focus remained on the pen itself, ordinary, disposable, yet writing a future that felt permanent. Afterward, reporters swarmed, but Naomi slipped quietly outside. She needed a breath, a sliver of quiet before the next tide of attention. The courtyard was filled with children from a local youth leadership program, one of Viridian's new community initiatives. They were laughing, chasing bubbles that floated up toward the sunlight. A small girl broke from the group and walked up to her. She was maybe 9 or 10, wearing a bright yellow dress and clutching a small notebook. "Dr. Carter?" she asked timidly. Naomi knelt to meet her eyes. "Hi there. What's your name, Ava?" the girl said. "My mom says you made the sky safer for people like us." Naomi's throat tightened gently. "Your mom sounds very wise." Ava smiled shyly. "I want to be a pilot, but sometimes kids at school say I can't because no one looks like me in the cockpit." Naomi's expression softened. "Well, Ava, maybe they just haven't looked high enough yet." The girl grinned wide, handing Naomi her notebook. "Can you sign this?" Naomi took the pen again, writing slowly, "To Ava fly higher than their doubt." When she looked up, Jonas Lee was standing nearby, recording from a respectful distance. "Couldn't resist." "Could you?" she teased. He smiled sheepishly. That moment was too good to miss. The documentary's almost done. We're calling it Altitude, the Naomi Carter story. It's not just about the flight anymore. It's about what came after. Naomi chuckled softly. "Just promise me you'll keep it honest, not heroic." Jonas lowered the camera slightly. "You've never needed heroes, Naomi. You just reminded the world what integrity looks like." As he walked away, Marcus approached with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You do realize you just rewrote an entire industry," he said, handing her one. Naomi took it, smiling. "We did it together. Every person who refused to stay silent." They stood there for a moment, watching the children run, the sunlight catching their laughter like music. The courtyard was filled with hope that felt tangible, solid, like maybe the world had finally exhaled. Later that evening, Naomi sat alone in her office. The city glowed outside her window, alive with the pulse of progress. She turned off the lights, letting the quiet settle around her. On her desk sat a single framed letter, the one from Renee Thompson, the mother who'd written months ago about her daughter wanting to be a pilot. Naomi smiled and opened her laptop, drafting a reply she'd never sent Dear Renee. "Your daughter's courage gave me strength when the days were hardest." Tell her the sky is wide enough for her dreams and mine both. Tell her I'm proud of her already. With love, Naomi. She hit print, signed it, and placed it beside the letter as a quiet promise. Her phone buzzed one last time that night, a message from Chairwoman Cortez. You changed the law today, but more than that, you changed belief. Naomi typed back, belief was always the beginning. Now comes the building. Before leaving, she looked once more at the city, its towers and lights, its people moving beneath the same sky she had once been told she didn't belong under. She whispered softly, we belong, all of us. The next morning, Veridian unveiled its newest campaign, featuring employees from every background, every age, every role. The slogan was simple, powerful, and born from her own words, the sky belongs to everyone. It spread across airports, billboards, and streaming screens. But the most powerful moment came weeks later, when Naomi boarded another flight, her first since the incident. She wore no disguise, no fear, as she walked toward her seat again. 1A, the crew greeted her warmly, genuine respect in their eyes. One of them, a young black woman wearing a captain's pin, smiled. Dr. Carter, it's an honor. I'm Captain Monroe. I've waited a long time to fly you. Naomi paused, emotion catching in her throat. Thank you, Captain. I've waited a long time to fly with someone like you. As she settled into her seat, she looked out the window. The engines roared softly, the runway gleamed beneath sunlight, and as the plane lifted into the air, Naomi closed her eyes. No fear, no tension, just peace. Somewhere far below, the city shrank and the horizon widened, and for the first time since that long, painful day, Naomi didn't feel like she was reclaiming something. She felt like she was simply where she belonged, above the clouds. She smiled. The sky had finally opened, and it was big enough for everyone. Dr. Naomi Carter's story reminds us that dignity is not given, it's lived. We often move through the world assuming justice is loud, that change comes from confrontation. But sometimes the most powerful form of courage is composure. Naomi didn't fight back with anger, she stood firm in truth, and through her quiet strength, she turned personal pain into public reform. For older generations who have endured their own silent battles, this story offers something deeper than outrage. It offers recognition. The fight for respect, for fairness, for a place at the table never really ends, but it evolves. Naomi shows us that leadership isn't about titles or wealth. It's about what we choose to do when the world tries to make us small. Her journey teaches one lasting lesson. Silence can be strategy, and grace can be revolution. Sometimes, the calmest voice changes everything. Thank you so much for watching. If Naomi's story touched your heart, let it remind you kindness, courage, and integrity still matter.